Brian. Welcome back to the show. We love your ToyVentures YouTube channel. Tell us about the new magazine that you are producing.
I had published a book about 8 years ago called Rach Toys, Cheap Crazed Playthings, and it did extremely well. It sold out. I self-published it. I spent all the money on it, and it was very well received. And for years, it's been sold out for a few years. And, it goes for like $100 on eBay and stuff like that, that silly thing. And people kept asking me to reprint it, but it was such a big part of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And somebody approached me in the new year, and it's the same folks that do I'm just talking, I haven't actually announced this, but I'll say it on your show, that do the television series, The Toys That Made Us. They're getting into book publishing, and they asked me if they could reprint it. And I had a long kind of soul searching about that, and then, letting it go. And it's your baby, right? And I thought, I'm not going to do anything with it, so I might as well let them, have a go and let the book have a second life. And then I started thinking about, what do I want to do now? And then, of course, while I was trying to figure all that out, COVID happened, and I was laid off, which, wasn't that big a deal to me at the time. But that gave me months of time to myself, and being a creative person and somebody who is easily bored. I can't just sit around and watch television all day or sit on Facebook and listen to people. I decided, okay, I'm going to throw myself into a magazine, and I'm going to see where it goes. And I'm going to ask a few friends for guidance and help and photos. And I've had some fantastic help from some wonderful people. And during this whole period, it actually kind of renewed my faith in humanity. And then a good friend of mine, I was just going to fund it myself with the profits from Rach Toys. And a good friend of mine said, no, do a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, because it'll bring people to the table you don't even know. And I thought, oh, well, that's a good idea. So when I got close enough to where, the magazine isn't printed yet, it'll probably be printed in a week or so. When I got close enough to where I thought something was, showable, I did an Indiegogo. And it had a conservative, if I make this much money, I'll print it. And I got there in 5 hours, which was tremendously exciting and, very good for my spirits. And
I think we were the second or third contributors. I mean, as soon as it came up, we were like, oh, we got to get this. This is awesome.
I hope you really enjoy it. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's just been a wonderful thing. And this isn't the end for me. I have at least, my goal is to publish 3 more issues in the next calendar year, so in the next 12 months, possibly 4, but I know my limits. The first one I wrote almost entirely myself. I had a lot of help on the magazine covers only one toy company for the first issue. And that is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a toy company called Azrak, Hamway International, or AHI, which was a big rival to Mego in the 1970s. And the reason for me wanting to cover that is because they just are kind of unsung. They made a lot of really groovy toys, and they are mentioned in a lot of books, but there's nothing really that just celebrates the company itself. And so I've done this first issue, and I decided to do the first issue this way because I was so fascinated with the company and all the different things they made, because they cover so many topics just like Mego. They cover Star Trek, Planet of the Apes, Space 1999, monsters, Kiss, and superheroes. That's the first issue. And I think any kid of the 1970s or any fan of that genre will be able to pick this magazine up and find something really interesting that they want to see.
And you have such a passion for Rach Toys, and so it's natural for you to have something like this.
Yeah, I grew up with Rach Toys. Like I have memories. I honestly remember like on a Saturday morning, like my dad was taking me somewhere, and whenever my dad took me somewhere, he ended up making a sales call. That's who we were. And I can honestly remember waiting for my dad in a store and watching him put parachuting Mr. Spock's on a rack. And I think when you grow up like that, it changes you, if that makes any sense.
Well, I remember these toys we had in our neighborhood, it was called Wawa, which is essentially a regional 7-Eleven, and that was where we would get comic books and toys. So, like, it's one of those things that you had to be of that time period, living in that time period, to appreciate how unique these toys are. From modern eyes, they look horrible, but there's something so endearing about them.
Yeah, the thing that I think, because I've spent a lot of time postulating on this, probably too much, the thing I think is most important about 70s Rach Toys is that there were no style guides at the time. For those that are listening that don't know what a style guide is, when you get the Star Trek license now, let's just say, you get a book with all the logos you're allowed to use, with all the imagery you're allowed to use, and then Paramount will want. And to be honest with you, I worked in designing packaging for licensed goods in the early 2000s, and it's not fun. It is a boring ass job, and they drain any ounce of creativity out of you. The only thing I'm ever proud of is I designed a Justice League package that looked really cool, and I swear to God, Mattel ripped it off a year later from me. But back then, there was no such, you got the Star Trek license, they handed you a picture of Kirk and Spock in the Enterprise, and they said, no, do what you want. And so every AHI Star Trek toy looks absolutely different, and there's some wonderful creativity on the packaging, and it could never happen again. Yes, it's cheap. Yes, the stuff is trash, but look at it. It's an art form unto itself. It's an American piece of folk art, in my opinion.
No doubt about it. I mean, and they run the gambit of licenses too. Space 1999, superheroes, cartoons. So I mean, it's all things in our wheelhouse that we love.
Yeah, and they also dealt in the absurd. There's this crass commerciality to it, where basically I think the first thing that they ever did that sold well was Batman. They did Batmobiles and Batcopters and parachuting Batman, and then they would just they call it label slapping, but they would just apply that template to absolutely every other license they got. So you got Planet of the Apes helicopters and Planet of the Apes parachutes, which made absolutely no sense. And one of the things that I find really funny is I interviewed a former Remco AHI employee for one of my articles. He's a really great guy. And I said, we were talking about the parachuting superheroes, and in the magazine, he reveals why they stopped, why they fell out of vogue. And it basically was buyers would go, well, why does Superman need a parachute? Which, we all knew he didn't, but it didn't matter. The AHI knew that kids would buy it anyways. And I just think that's really funny. And he even said these buyers who think they know everything, but don't, kind of killed something that they were selling millions of, millions and millions of these things every year.
I remember getting the Incredible Hulk utility belt, and I knew that the Incredible Hulk didn't need a utility belt, didn't have one, but guess what? I love the Hulk. I still like playing with it.
Yeah, that was AHI's other side, Remco, and yeah,
But it was that mentality of, kids just want to have fun stuff to play with.
Yeah, and I remember I had the Batman one and I had the Spider-Man one, which made perfect sense, even though I think the Spider-Man one had a gun. which and they even made a wonderful Wonder Woman one that was just every kid on my block had that one. It was amazing. It was her belt with her lasso and her tiara and her bracelets, and it was so perfect. And yeah, when it came to the Hulk, it was sort of like, well, the Hulk is basically a man who doesn't have shoes. So what do you do with them? And they actually did 2 versions of that Hulk belt. There's I can't remember. Both come with a gamma radiation detector, which I think is hilarious because isn't the Hulk just like oozing gamma radiation? Like, wouldn't that thing just be going off all day? And then, did you have the one with the kazoo?
I had the kazoo one. It was like a strange shaped kazoo.
Yeah, it was like it's this weird looking kazoo that it was called the Hulk voice modulator. Which, I got to give them credit. They were trying, to do something with it, But yeah, that was a really weird toy. I don't think it's hard to tell if it sold poorly or if they just made a bajillion of them. Because I remember a stack of those Hulk utility belts right next to all the unsold Mego Mr. Mxyzptlk dolls. I think he was the last picked 8-inch superhero from every kid.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how that works out. But I think it's safe to say we're going to have some issues that talk about Remco and talk about a little bit more obscure things.
Yeah, like my next plan with issue 2 is the main feature will be about the 1976 television series called Monster Squad. Because the original prototypes for the action figures that were never released by Ideal came up on auction, and I did not win them because I don't have $6,000 to spend on action figures right now. But I did know the person who did, and they were extremely interested in working with me on that, and I'm very grateful for that. And I do have a great collection of weird Monster Squad items. Another friend of mine who's actually got a column in the first issue, Steve, he's going to do a history of a company called Shindana Toys, and Shindana has an amazing history. They were part of Gerald Ford's Operation Bootstrap, and they were formed in the 1970s to provide children of color with action figures and toys. And they created such memorable items as Disco Wanda, the talking Red Fox doll I have above me, a Dr. J doll. Unfortunately, they made an O.J. Simpson doll, which hasn't aged well. And then they made a famous action figure of basically like a copy of Shaft called Slade. So they left a really wonderful mark on the landscape, and you don't hear enough about them. And this guy really knows a lot about them, and I'm looking forward to digging deep. And then the other thing I have going on is I learned my valuable lesson for issue 2, and that is don't try to write everything yourself. So I've reached out to a couple of collectors, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to ask them only the following criteria, which is pick something you love, take some photos of it, and write a story about it. I don't care what it is, but if it's weird and obscure, I want it for the issue. Because I want to shine a light on more interesting things. I love picking up, I subscribe to about 4 different magazines right now. I still love print magazines. And
oh, we do too. We're not only collectors, but we're readers. There's something about physical media that really connects.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're collectors. We like touching things. And do you guys read like Infinity magazine?
Oh, that British one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh, it's fantastic. And they're really nice guys too. And I love, when they do an issue about like Buck Rogers, and they show all the Buck Rogers toys. Like, it's just fantastic. But I want to do, I want to do an issue about Star Maidens and show all the Star Maidens toys. I want to talk about the unproduced Logan's Run toys, and just stuff like that. I kind of want to go all over the place. We've got a line on this former Remco employee. This guy was key to creating the Mini Monsters line for Remco.
Oh, I love those. The
Oh,
ones
me
that
too.
They had two versions with the glow in the dark.
Yeah,
and regular.
absolutely. And I've he's actually in issue 1, but like his heyday was really, he developed that line, and he had a lot of interesting things. And I also happen to know someone who owns quite a few of the prototypes. So we're going to do this kind of, like, let's look at the Mini Monsters and that sort of thing. I don't want it to be, it sounds like it's all monsters all the time, but I do collect monster toys, and I want to kind of keep this like all over the place with the different subjects and talking about, I will start talking about Mego items and doing that sort of stuff, because I miss a well done vintage toy magazine. I actually, I would buy Lee's and Tomart, and I loved Toy Fair magazine. I loved it. And what I understand is when Wizard folded its doors, Toy Fair was the only profitable magazine they were still publishing. And talking to the guys at Infinity and reading from, I love a magazine, if anyone else is listening, it's called Shock Cinema. It's a lot of horror, exploitation, and vintage cinema, and they interview some, fascinating people. And that guy was publishing recently that his sales have never been better. So there is an audience there. And I think that with ToyVentures, I want to find, I want to do the Lighthouse thing again and see who's out there that wants to read about, cool vintage toys every 4 months.
Is it always going to be toys, or are you going to branch out to some other pop culture matter from that time period?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I haven't actually discussed it with the human being yet, so I don't want to bring it up, but there's a guy I know that collects memorabilia from a certain movie that does include toys, but he includes posters and one-sheets and that sort of thing. I don't intend, I'm going to ask him, point blank in the next week or two, would you write an article about this for me? So yeah, I fully expect him to include non-toy material, but I'm just kind of playing it by ear, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't, it's a balance. You want to get people intrigued by some of the content, and if you go too obscure, it can I don't know if it confuses people, but it doesn't titillate them as much. So I've got to find the crowd. You got to wrap it in a crowd pleaser. So the middle of the magazine's got to be that thing everyone wants to read, and then you can kind of throw in these other things because they amuse you, or you think they deserve more attention and credit. I am, if anything, I am kind of like a prototypical hipster. Like my daughter always beats me up on that. Like I'm kind of that guy who hates the band when they get popular. So I've got to kind of keep that in check as well. I don't want to get too weird and obscure for everybody.
Well, I think it's good because there is a point where there's oversaturation with certain licenses that we're just tired of seeing to a certain degree. I don't want to say I dislike them, but there's a point where you just say, there's 100 magazines out there like that, and yours seems to be very unique, and that's the charm of it.
Yeah, that's the thing is I've got to kind of carve my voice, and I'm still working on that. But I have every issue will be laid out by me, but I think you're only going to get 1 or 2 Brian items in every issue. So I have some things that I'm fascinated with, like terrible dime store knockoff action figures, if you guys follow my YouTube channel at all. But I do plan on doing some more mainstream items that I have total love for, a lot of mainstream. I love Star Trek toys. I'm fascinated by Star Trek toys. So you kind of just want to do this little balance and create a unique niche that no one else is providing in the same point.
Now, we still have a pull box at our local comic book store. Are you thinking about having it distributed to stores?
100%. To get it distributed through something like Diamond? Yeah, absolutely. The kicks, the Indiegogo went so well that I'm not obviously just going to print like 500 issues. I'm going to do an overrun. I'm going for broke. I'm putting every penny into this endeavor, and then I'm going to try and find a distributor for the first issue. Of course, the best way to get it, if you'd missed the Indiegogo, would be to get it from me, and that that'll be very easy in about 3 weeks' time. But I will be attempting to find distributors. In fact, on our Indiegogo, we did a whole bunch of wholesale sales where I was selling a bundle of 10 copies. It didn't include all the perks, but it was done to get like shops and that sort of thing, interested shops and dealers. And I think we had quite a few takers, and I have, pardon me, I have quite a few people who are very interested in picking up bundles of the issue, the first issue. So I'm hoping to find somebody to distribute it. I'll also be putting it on Amazon as well.
That's fantastic. So our listeners can pick it up initially from you, but down the road, multiple outlets more than likely.
Yeah, I know at least one store I can say for certain will be Kamikaze in Somerville, Massachusetts, that will be picking it up because I'm friends with the one of the owners of the shop, and I hope he will write an article in issue 2 for me.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.